Good evening. My name is Diane Proctor, and I am privileged to sit on the steering committee of Stop Private Jet Expansion at Hanscom, or Anywhere, known broadly as SPJE, and on the board of Concord's League of Women Voters, which is co-sponsoring this event. We realize this is a busy time of year that you have chosen, and a busy evening, and that you have chosen to be with us this evening is deeply appreciated. In under 18 months, this effort has mobilized significant attention from a handful of ardent activists concerned about the condition of our climate. We have stirred the hearts and minds of thousands and made what John Lewis intoned good trouble. By gathering over 13,500 signatures for a petition to request that Governor Healy stop Massport's expansion and proposed expansion, to building a coalition of over 90 organizations, to writing over 1,500 poignant comments to the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency in response to the DEIR. Now, DEIR is an expression you will be hearing throughout the seminar tonight, and that stands for Draft Environmental Impact Review that is presented to MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency. And so we have written over 1,500 comments to the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency in response to the DEIR and to attracting the attention of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which declared the Minuteman National Historical Park and Walden among America's 11 most endangered historic places. With all of this, we have caused a stir and provoked positive reactions. In particular, Secretary Tepper has rejected the Hanscom developers' first report. But the fight is not over. The developers are preparing a supplemental DEIR, and when they do, we must be prepared to respond. And to that end, we are joined tonight by an impressive panel. Each of the 5 presenters is an expert in thinking about, acting on, writing about, and or mobilizing efforts to save our fragile planet. I'm sure many questions will come to mind as you listen this evening, so please put your questions in the chat box. We will do our best to get to your questions after all of the panelists have spoken. Our first panelist tonight is Dr. Susan Solomon. We are honored to welcome her to this discussion. She is a professor of atmospheric chemistry and climate science at MIT. In 2008, Dr. Solomon was selected by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And that should come as no surprise, for she is internationally known and lauded as a bold and brilliant leader in atmospheric sciences. Dr. Solomon is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and has received the National Medal of Science in Chemistry for, and this is a citation, her key scientific insights in explaining the cause of the Antarctic ozone hole and for advancing the understanding of the global ozone layer, for changing the direction of ozone research through her findings, and for exemplary service to worldwide public policy decisions and to the American public, end quote. From 2002 to 2008, she served as a co-chair of a working group of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Do you remember the IPCC? And with that work, she shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore in 2007. As a result of her extraordinary ozone research in the Antarctic, the Solomon Glacier and Solomon Snow Shadow in Antarctica were named in her honor, which, if you'll excuse the pun, I think is pretty cool. Get it? You know, pretty cool. Yeah. We've muted everybody, so I can't hear the roaring enthusiasm for such a bad pun. At any rate, her current focus at MIT is on issues relating to both atmospheric chemistry and climate change. As an author, Dr. Solomon has earned acclaim by both the New York Times and The Economist. Her new book, Solvable, How We Heated the Earth and How We Healed the Earth and We Can Do it. We heated it too, didn't we? How We Healed the Earth and How We Can Do It Again, is a must read for anyone who despairs about the climate crisis. as she encourages the reader to view yesterday's environmental success stories, such as shelving the future supersonic jets, banning the use of chlorofluorocarbons, lead, and DDT, each of which presents a roadmap to our path forward. As a consummate chemist, Dr. Solomon identifies in her book Solvable, the potent formulas that have catalyzed and secured positive change in the past, which included the synergistic mix of, this is an interesting mix of determined mothers, social and environmental activists, iconoclastic scientists, and bold visionary legislative craftsmen. With her profound knowledge and experience, captivating stories, and belief that the climate crisis is indeed solvable, she is just the inspiration needed to hearten and energize all of us, to forge on and to forge forward, reminding me, as I've read about Susan, of my beloved Rachel Carson. We applaud this formidable creative woman of science. Susan, the mic is yours.
Well, thank you so much for that extremely kind and flattering introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this great group tonight. I'm going to try to very, very quickly tell you some stories that I hope will help to inspire you to see that really there are so many remarkable examples of ways in which people have helped to heal the earth, and how we actually can still do it is the kind of thing that's in your hands. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Antarctic ozone hole, which is, as was mentioned, one of the key things that I've worked on for many years. Then I'm going to talk about smog, the problem of air pollution. I don't know why this is having trouble advancing. And then I'll talk about DDT. And I won't have time to talk about lead in paint. Actually, it's kind of amazing that we once had high lead content paint, marketed with a picture of a young boy on it. And of course, we also got rid of that. We got rid of lead and gas. We made tremendous strides in acid rain. There's many, many things that are touched upon in my book that I won't have time to deal with tonight. I won't really have time to talk about climate change in any depth. But I really just want to give you the sense of how important it is that people like you are acting as stewards of our planet, and how much that has happened to solve major environmental problems of the past. So what did it take to solve these challenges? Are there common factors that contributed to the success stories of all those things that I mentioned and more? And as I've studied this problem, I've become convinced that there's three foundational things involved in solving an environmental problem. It has to be personal to a lot of people. It has to be perceptible to those people, and they have to believe that it's practical. And that's what I call the 3 Ps. They come up in every single story. Can we still do it? I believe we can. I'll give you one quick example. Again, every story talks about the key role of citizens. I just want to emphasize this book is not a guidebook for the energy transition. There are many other really quite good books that do that, but that isn't what this book really is about. So let me start actually with DDT. As amazing as the lead paint commercial was, this one is even more amazing. DDT on a baby, can you imagine? DDT was developed prior to World War II, but it really began to see widespread use during that war because it allowed the American side to actually spray our soldiers and the islands, particularly in the Pacific sector that they were going to go into, that had a lot of insects on them, in a way that kept them safe during the war. Many wars have been actually won and lost over issues of infectious disease spread by insects. Napoleon, for example, during his retreat from Russia, actually, it's believed that his troops had typhus, and that was part of their problem. But after after all, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing to use on a routine basis. And it began to be used on a very routine basis after the war in agriculture. So they would literally crop dust everywhere. People were aware of the fact that DDT could cause death if you, for example, were a chemical plant worker making DDT, you could die. Farm workers could get sick from it. But they weren't aware of subclinical impacts on humans. By subclinical, we mean things that don't send you to the emergency room. There were lots of interest groups involved here, not just the chemical companies that made it, but also the massive agricultural industry. So this is a case where really we did solve an environmental problem that involved forcing a major industry to change. So when people say, hey, we can't change big industries, we can only change small ones, I would argue that's simply not true. And certainly the aviation industry and the private aviation industry is no exception to that. The first signs that, I guess I'll say first that this was clearly a very personal problem because people were aware that DDT could build up in tissues and build up in bodies of animals. And that became extremely perceptible when robins began dying, particularly in the American Midwest. DDT has a long lifetime in soil. So what you spray on a tree this year falls down, gets into the soil. Maybe it doesn't do that much damage to the robins that year, but then the next year you spray again and again and again and again. It's building up in the mulch that the earthworms are eating, and the robins eat the earthworms, and then they die. And these birds have been brought to the biology department at the campus of Michigan State University in East Lansing in the late 50s. So this makes this issue deeply, deeply personal. People began to really worry about it when there was clear evidence that it was getting into the milk supply, both through the feed that was fed to cows, which had been sprayed with DDT, and even the spraying of the dairy barns. Rachel Carson was the woman who brought all of this to our attention. She had been a writer with the Fish and Wildlife Service, so reports of dying fish and dying birds throughout America would cross her desk because that was her job, to keep track of everything that people were seeing. And she had no intention of writing such a book. She wrote many books that were really remarkably beautiful tone poems, really, about the beauty of the sea. She didn't want to be a controversial writer. But she, I guess, felt compelled to write Silent Spring when she realized what was at stake. Critics claim that without these pesticides, oh boy, America couldn't feed itself. The benefits could outweigh the risks, so it costs too much to do anything else. The same kind of arguments that people sometimes level against climate change. And they attacked the science, said that Carson didn't know what she was talking about, and they attacked her personally. Every time I look at these statements that were made about her, you have to cringe and you have to ask yourself, how in the world could that sort of stuff be in things like reviews of her book? Here's another example of a review of her book. Well, this issue got to the attention all the way to President Kennedy, who convened a panel of distinguished scientists through his Presidential Science Advisory Council. And they basically agreed with the key science points that Carson had made. So her science was fine. But the science alone is never enough to solve an environmental problem. DDT was still in widespread use. So what can we do? Many of you will probably remember seeing these DDT trucks roll down the street. Children sometimes played in the fog. What a horrendous thing to think about now. It was the Brookhaven Town Natural Resources Committee citizens group, which started meeting in each other's living rooms, a group of about 20 people initially. They had been trying to stop DDT spraying since 1947. Nothing happened until a lawyer named Yannicone joined the group, and he said they needed to sue, and therefore they sued the town mosquito commission. They realized that that was something different. When they did that, they got a temporary injunction, so the commission had to switch to a safer and more practical pesticide for at least a year until the case came up in court. By that time, the commission had learned to do something different. They didn't need DDT anymore. So even though the judge threw the case out because he said, hey, only the legislature could make policy, he couldn't make policy. BTNRC still won while losing, and they became the Environmental Defense Fund. They have 2.5 million members now. That's Mr. Iannacone, the lawyer. They then instituted more lawsuits in 65 different communities in Michigan. They all stopped using DDT. But the next steps were to take it to the national level. And they realized that the place to do that was in Wisconsin, where any Wisconsin citizen can ask any state department for a ruling on the applicability of a particular set of facts to any rule enforced by the department. So a group of Wisconsin EDF members sued the Department of Water Resources to determine whether DDT was a water pollutant because fish were dying. The agency, under the Wisconsin law, has to evaluate the request with a public hearing. The hearing has to go through to the end. It couldn't be dismissed. It attracted a huge amount of attention. And while this was going on, then all the evidence for insects and birds and fish being killed came into the national news and on the TV news, not just obscure scientific paper. Here's an article from the New York Times. Fish also died in the Great Lakes during the hearing. At that point, the state of Wisconsin banned DDT before the hearing even ended, and so did Michigan. That's the weight of evidence that was presented. DDT was effectively banned in the US in 1973, and it's a wonderful example of the combined power of citizens, science, communication, and the courts to change a massive industry. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to, I think, skip stratospheric ozone. Let me talk about smog, but I will spend some time on this because it's another issue where certainly the issue was highly perceptible, immediately personal, especially if you had asthma. Los Angeles was a real cauldron of smoke. Nowadays, on a good day, Los Angeles looks pretty good. They still have some pollution, the worst in the nation, but much better than before. Thousands of people died in some smog incidents. Smog, of course, is now still a problem, particularly in places like Beijing and New Delhi, where they just have so many people and so many cars. They're never going to be able to eliminate smog in those places without the electric vehicle being more widespread. But certainly it was highly personal and highly perceptible. Again, a citizens group played an enormous role here, and this time it was the Stamp Out Smog group of LA women, which was led by a lady named Marge LeVay, who had a 2-year-old who had an asthma attack. She was the wife of a film producer in Hollywood, and she got together a group of Hollywood women. They knew how to get attention. They marched, they protested in front of hearings. They linked up with garden clubs, and they forced another big industry to change. General Motors was America's #1 company on the Fortune 500 list in the 60s and 70s, and they strenuously resisted changing anything. This was all happening against the backdrop of a larger social movement of change, largely instigated by the Vietnam War, but also women's rights. So along with the idea of giving peace a chance was the idea of giving Earth a chance. The questioning of authority and the importance of people demanding change was something that a lot of people were thinking about in this era. Another person who was forced to think about it was President Nixon, because he looked out the window on Earth Day, the first Earth Day in 1970, and he saw some of the many people flowing past the window going to the National Mall. On that day, 20 million people demonstrated nationwide. Nixon knew at that time he had to become a player in this issue. So a week later, the next week, his advisory council set up the idea of having an EPA. Later on in his life, it became clear that he really didn't care that much about environment. You know, he said some very negative things about environmental protection, but he was forced to do it by popular demand. And you can really see that when you take a look at the vote that passed the United States Senate 73-0 in September of 1970. Can you just imagine a 73-0 vote on anything, much less, clean air? It really demonstrates the unstoppable power of public opinion, the importance of social movements. Technology steering policy is what was going on here, because once the Clean Air Act was signed with its requirements to reduce pollutants, the only practical solution was the catalytic converter. So the industry was forced to quickly develop those, and the technology was steered into a new direction by the act. I'm going to skip stratospheric ozone, so I apologize for just zooming through these because I really want to get to, well, I'm going to maybe not skip all of it. There we go. Okay. I've been privileged to work on the Antarctic ozone hole. And the way that I describe myself really as the most lucky environmental scientist on the planet, because I was 29 years old when the British Antarctic Survey discovered the ozone hole, and I was 30 when I had the chance to go to Antarctica and make measurements to try to understand why this massive hole in the ozone layer had developed. It was a shock to everyone. We never expected to see this big of an effect so soon. We thought we were going to see a few percent change in the ozone layer in 100 years if we kept using chlorofluorocarbons at the rate we were using them back in the 70s. Turned out to be much worse than we thought because of the extreme cold temperatures of the Antarctic that give rise to a type of chemistry that I don't have time to explain. But you can see how the October average ozone over this station, the British Antarctic Survey Station, stayed fairly constant for maybe 20 years of measurements, and then boom, down it fell. And it's slightly recovering now. The Japanese station quickly confirmed the British measurements, and so did we. This was something clearly perceptible and understandable to people. Even if they couldn't see it with their own eyes, they could easily understand a picture like this. You didn't have to be a statistician to make sense of it. I do want to say how important people were in this story too, because this is showing you the metric tons of chlorofluorocarbons sold as a function of year in the United States, the rest of the world, and the total. Notice what happened here. In the US, suddenly around the 1970s, the sales of chlorofluorocarbons dropped. These are the chemicals that were causing the ozone hole. And these were the chemicals that in 1974, a theoretical paper, an idea was published that said, hey, we think these chemicals cause catalytic loss of ozone, and if we keep using them, we might see a few percent loss in 100 years. That was what catalyzed this change. It wasn't the discovery of the ozone hole or the signing of the Montreal Protocol to protect it. It was the idea of that theory that made millions of Americans literally go to their medicine cabinet, take this spray can, and replace it with that thing, right? Now, you'd have to be a cretin not to do this. How hard is that? And so millions of Americans did it, and it basically knocked the wind out of the chemical industry in this country. That did not happen in Europe. We can be really proud that we Americans did this. These are consumer choices now that are driving a massive change and changing a fairly big industry. Practical solutions came quickly, not just to replace the chlorofluorocarbons in spray cans. Nowadays, we still have spray cans, but they don't have chlorofluorocarbons in them. They are safe for the ozone layer. We also replaced the chlorofluorocarbons that were the little bubbles in styrofoam. We still have styrofoam, which you could argue is not a good thing, but at least it doesn't have CFCs in it. Nowadays, you might use other things like cardboard for your Big Mac. They used to have styrofoam. We replaced them as cleaning agents. We replaced them in air conditioning. And we've even now replaced those compounds that were the initial round of substitutes for the chlorofluorocarbons with a new set of compounds, the hydrofluoroolefins are what's coming in now. And that's because there is an amendment to the Montreal Protocol that was signed in Rwanda in 2016. And amazingly, when this happened, I actually thought there's no way that the US today is going to be able to ratify this new amendment. It's about hydrofluorocarbon substitutes. They don't deplete the ozone layer because they don't have chlorine, but they do, even though they have fluorine, fluorine doesn't deplete the ozone layer, but they are potent greenhouse gases. So, I thought this is never going to pass, but yet the amendment was ratified by our Senate just a couple of years ago. So we can still do it when it makes sense. I'm not going to have time to talk about the science of climate change. I think I'll just say one of the most obvious and most personal and perceptible changes is the change in extreme hot temperatures. The type of weather that we're getting nowadays gives us heat waves, the likes of which we've never seen before. So the distribution of normal temperatures just moves over, and then you got a lot of really extreme temperatures, they're even higher than you ever had. City of Boston, we used to get about 10 days above 90 per year. Now we're getting way more than that, and you can see what might happen if we continue. Of course, we're also worried about sea level rise, heavy rainfall, as is happening right now in Eastern Europe. All those things have a relationship to climate change. So it's sad, but it has become personal and perceptible to people. And the question people are asking is, are solutions practical? Well, we have many practical actions we can take already. And every 10th of a degree, every 100th of a degree avoided matters. And every way in which the developed nations can do the most that they possibly can do to reduce our emissions is extremely important on the international stage. So I really think that the type of work you guys are doing is incredible. You're joined by a social movement that is getting broader and broader and involves a lot of young people, also a lot of older people. Citizens Climate Lobby does a lot of great work too. And of course, there are many leading figures that are helping to advance this issue. And thank you very much for your attention.
Susan, I hope you will come back sometime and we can put a whole hour together for you to talk with us. You have so much to teach us. Thank you so very, very much. I know Susan is going to stay on, so if you have questions for Susan, pop them into the chat box, and we will. And if we have time at the end, she will have a chance to answer them. There are other ways in which we will also make that possible. Thank you so much.
Thanks
I'd
again.
now like to introduce our next speaker, Corinne Dowd. Corinne is a climate reality project leader in the Boston Metropolitan Chapter. She co-chairs the Environmental Justice Committee at First Parish in Bedford, and she is with the Bedford Mothers Out Front leadership team, leading their local chapters a campaign to stop private jet expansion at Hanscom or anywhere. There she is. She also enlivens and informs the SPJE steering committee. She's a wonderful colleague with whom to share this good work. Corinne will tell us what we are up against and what we have achieved so far. Thank you, Corinne. The platform is now yours.
Thank you, Diane, and good evening, everyone. We've got a climate problem. As Dr. Solomon shared with us, it is critical that we take practical action to heal our Earth. Already, people are suffering and dying due to more frequent and extreme climate events like hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and poor air quality, with damage costs running in the billions. The science is clear. To avert the worst impacts of climate change, carbon emissions need to be limited as much as possible, and it's urgent. Transportation is the largest source of direct greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts, and private jets are the most polluting form of travel per passenger mile for their carbon footprint. Next. In January 2023, we learned of plans for a massive development at the Hanscom North Airfield for private jet hangars. Hanscom is about 20 miles northwest of Boston and is adjacent to the Minuteman National Historic Park and Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge, and it's not far from Walden Pond. The Massachusetts Port Authority, or Massport, owns and operates Hanscom Field, Logan, and Worcester airports. Hanscom Field is a civilian airport and is the busiest and largest private jet port in New England. In terms of total flight operations, it is the second busiest airport in New England, second only to Logan. As you can see in the picture, Hanscom Field abuts Hanscom Air Force Base, but they are separate and distinct. Active military flights at the base ended in 1973. Military flights sometimes use Massport's runway, but that's only about 1% of the flights. Private flights include some worthy uses such as medical flights. Our concern is not about those. or the Air Force Base, but about stopping expansion of infrastructure to house private jets. Next. Hanscom Field is located in Bedford, Concord, Lexington, and Lincoln, and the proposed development would be sited entirely in Bedford. What is shown here is about 2/3 of a mile long. Massport and private developers want to add 17 new private jet hangars and renovate an old Navy hangar on the 47-acre site. A year after the initial project proposal, the developer reduced the number of hangars from 27 to 17, but they just made the hangars bigger, and in fact, increased the overall project by over 26,000 square feet. The proposed North Airfield development is over 500,000 square feet and will require clear-cutting significant undeveloped portions and paving about 20 acres, and that'll remove mature trees and natural habitat. This would be the largest single development in Hanscom's history, and according to an independent study, could add up to 6,000 additional flight operations per year. And that would produce about an additional 150,000 tons of CO2 annually. Next. In 2021, the governor signed into law an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy, which mandates net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. However, Massport interprets net zero to apply only to its buildings and ground infrastructure, and it excludes CO2e emissions from aircraft. While our towns, cities, businesses, private organizations, and individuals are working hard to reduce their carbon footprint, Massport's plans are a direct and immediate threat to Massachusetts' efforts to rein in climate change. Next. The Coalition to Stop Private Jet Expansion at Hanscom or Anywhere started in May of 2023 with 10 groups and now includes over 90 partner organizations. We've grown from a local group to a statewide coalition, from Boston to the Berkshires, with supporters from over 71 towns and cities across Massachusetts. We now have a base of over 10,000 supporters, and we've gathered 13,833 signatures on the petition to Governor Healy, urging her to halt private jet expansion. Next. Our strategy is to target those who have the authority, direct or indirect, to stop private jet expansion. Specifically, our governor, the developers, and the Massport board. Our power comes from the ever-growing grassroots support of the public, the coalition itself, and our many partner organizations who help amplify our actions and take initiatives of their own to advance the campaign. Next. On October 2nd, 2023, hundreds rallied at the State House in Boston to deliver over 10,000 petition signatures to Governor Healy's office, urging her to halt private jet expansion. That same day, a report was released by the Institute of Policy Studies analyzing 18 months of data on Hanscom flights. The report found that at least half of the private luxury jets that use Hanscom go to resorts and vacation hotspots, which counters Massport's claim that they are used primarily for business and corporate purposes. The rally triggered extensive media coverage, this including the Boston Globe, Boston Herald, GBH, WBUR, and others. Next. The two private developers working with Massport on Hanscom's North Airfield development are Runway Realty Ventures and North Airfield Ventures. On the left is a developers public information forum. On the right is a demonstration at the offices of Jeffrey Leerink, a principal investigator in North Airfield Ventures and Runway Realty Ventures, who is collaborating with Massport, the owner of Hanscom Field. Developing infrastructure to expand private jet operations during a climate emergency will produce even further setbacks for our state, climate, and national landmarks. Next. Shockingly, Massport still operates under the same charter as when it was established in 1956, with the 1950s mindset of unlimited aviation growth without consideration for the climate. Massachusetts lawmakers have been pressing to update Massport's charter to bring it in line with current goals of the Commonwealth, but unfortunately, the climate bill did not get past this session. The provision is expected to be taken up again in some form. Massport must not continue to ignore the harmful climate impacts of the proposed jet expansion project. The Massport Board of Directors meets monthly, and the public has opportunity to register to make a public comment at their meetings. Next. Together, we are gaining widespread visibility through actions of showing up and speaking out, some of which are highlighted on this slide, and the media is increasingly taking notice. Building grassroots visibility and momentum is a key lever in our campaign to stop private jet expansion at Hanscom or anywhere. As Bill McKibben says, the most important thing an individual can do about climate change is be a little less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to make change. So let's be that change. Next. Though we have more work to do, we have big wins to celebrate. We've changed the culture from accepting this as, oh, it's a done deal, to an enraged and engaged, we have got to stop this. The DEIR, the Draft Environmental Impact Report produced by the developers, was rejected due to our efforts of generating 1,773 public comments and an independent report commissioned by the coalition. Regarding Runway Realty Ventures' Old Navy hangar, the historic tax credits were withdrawn, meaning that the public funds are no longer being used for private use. The Massport Charter update was supported by the Senate and House and gathered 41 co-sponsors representing 94 towns and cities across the Commonwealth. In May, the National Trust for Historic Preservation designated Minuteman National Park, Walden Pond, and nearby landmarks as America's 11 most endangered historic places due to the environmental threat of the proposed expansion. So this elevates the issue to national significance. So to conclude, expanding private jet operations during a climate emergency is irresponsible, indefensible, and unjustifiable, and we must do all we can to stop it. Thank you. And back to you, Diane.
You're muted.
That was a terrific presentation and a wonderful summary of the good work that this committee has been doing. Our next speaker is Neil Rasmussen. He actually, in truth, needs no introduction. He is the president of Save Our Heritage, an important personage in the town of Concord, an historic and environmental preservation, and president of Save Our Heritage, which is an historical and environmental preservation organization. An MIT-trained engineer and high-tech professional, Neil co-founded a company in 1980 that pioneered the conversion of solar PV from DC to AC for home electricity. As well, he has an extensive background in energy efficiency. He is here to update us about the DEIR, the draft environmental report that was submitted by the proponent of the North Airfield project, and explain why it was rejected as inadequate by Secretary Tepper. Neil, the floor is yours, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Diane. As Professor Solomon points out, people can make a difference. And sometimes there are technical solutions that we can use. But in this case, there are no known technical alternatives to the emissions associated with private jets. And flying in a private jet is the most environmentally destructive activity a person can engage in without getting arrested. So it's a big deal when we're looking at the largest private jet project known in the United States and likely in the world. So the proponents of projects like this have to submit a truthful environmental estimate of their environmental impact under this law called MEPA that was established some years ago. And the project cannot proceed without the disclosure. And the disclosure is not considered done until the state accepts it. But it's important to understand the MEPA process does not judge whether the impacts are acceptable to the public. It's just to determine whether they're fairly represented. And deciding whether those impacts are going to be unacceptable to the public is really a separate project and requires separate regulatory or public policy findings. So the Secretary of the Environment can't reject the project. She can only force the disclosure of the impacts. And it's important to remember that the state, under federal law, cannot regulate aircraft emissions. It can only control the ground infrastructure that support those emissions. Now, what happened in this case is we went through a long process, and the state found that the greenhouse gas emissions described in their disclosure report were inadequate and rejected the report. Pretty unusual situation. And so what they found, in summary, was the greenhouse gas emissions were incorrectly examined only in the immediate vicinity of the airport. They only disclosed emissions of the aircraft right as they flew out of the runway and did not count their emissions beyond that. And they also found that the number of flights generated by the project was grossly underestimated. And they claimed, for example, and the secretary objected to these claims, they claimed that the growth of the flights would occur whether or not the project was completed, and so it would have no effect. And they claimed that the project would actually reduce flights at the airport because there was something called ferry flights that would be reduced, and overall there would be a net reduction. And ferry flights, just to recall, are those flights that wanted to originate at Hanscom but can't due to incapacity of the hangars, and therefore originate at a different airport and fly through Hanscom. So in a sense, if they existed, those flights would create extra flights through Hanscom and have some extra greenhouse gas emissions. But the secretary did not find that there were such flights. And they also, one of the other things that they claimed was, and they referenced it in many kinds of releases and even in their documents, that they described their project as net zero. But it was grossly misleading because they proposed to put a solar array in to help make it net zero, but the solar array didn't offset any emissions of the aircraft. It only offset the emissions associated with the buildings that they were going to build. The hangars themselves used a lot of gas and electricity. They actually heat those hangars and actually heat the floors in those hangars to keep their airplanes nice and warm. To add insult to injury, this proposed solar array, which would have made the buildings net zero, actually wasn't even part of the project and was just a theoretical thing that they might do someday. And so it was incorrect to count that as a benefit of the project. Our approach to taking this on was took a couple of forms. First of all, we needed to understand that the state does not have the expertise to evaluate the claims made by the proponents in this case. They simply can't do all the right kind of flight analysis or other environmental analysis. They just review the report and try and decide if it was fair. And the proponent has a great incentive to understate the emissions associated with aircraft or anything, because once their report is accepted, no matter what it says, if later they emit much more than was in the report, there's no consequences. Nobody slaps them on the hand. Nobody calls them back and said, you lied. Nothing happens to them. So they're really incented to try and understate emissions associated with these. Now, we generated a lot of public comments, and they're helpful and show the MEPA process just how much people care about this. But it's difficult for public comments to overcome the army of experts that the work for both Massport and for the proponent to try and put forth their claims of low emissions. So what we needed to do, and were advised to do, was get an expert consultant that was a trusted consultant to challenge and inspect the proponent's EIR and do the appropriate analysis. And with your help and hundreds of donations, we raised the funds to engage industrial economics to do this. And what they did was incredible. They examined the flight records of every airplane that flew in and out of Hanscom, not only their flights in and out of Hanscom, but where they flew after that and where they came from before that, and tracked those flights to try and figure out how those flights would be impacted by new hangars at Hanscom, and what kind of expected new aircraft might occur. And what the consultant found was that the developers' claims for all these ferry flights that were supposed to reduce the total flights at Hanscom was just not correct. One of the things they claimed was that 600 flights of that kind that would be reduced went to Logan Airport and would be eliminated. But the consultant found that couldn't be true because there are no based aircraft at Logan, which is a requirement for these ferry flights. And interestingly enough, the expert herself, when testifying at a public hearing, said she didn't think those flights should have even been included in their disclosure as reducing the flights, because she didn't think they were ferry flights, but was kind of pressured to do so by the developer. And of the flights that were found, only 3 aircraft actually exhibit the characteristics associated with these ferry flights, and those 3 aircraft would have some reduction in their emissions. But incredibly, only if those hangars, all these giant new hangars, introduced only 1 new jet into Hanscom, it would cancel out all the savings associated with those 3 aircraft that currently generate ferry flights. And so what they found was almost all the capacity, and those hangars, you see the number of them, it looks like 17 or something. That's not how many aircraft they hold. You can put 4, 5, and 6 aircraft in a hangar sometimes. So the total capacity that's proposed here would generally be used for all new aircraft that didn't previously exist at Hanscom Field and generate the associated greenhouse gas emissions. And the summaries are pretty clear. You can look at them here. They found that it aired, and they found that there'd be new greenhouse gas emissions associated with the hangar construction, totally contrary to what the proponent had claimed about this. So this is a big deal because we've already got 600,000 tons per year spewing out of Hanscom Field, out of the private jets there. And to put that in perspective, because it's hard to say what that means, it cancels out about half the benefits of all the solar that's ever been installed in Massachusetts. When you install solar, it offsets greenhouse gas emissions from power production, which is good. But all we've ever done, about half of it is already canceled out just by the private luxury jet flights today at Hanscom. And this project, if it adds 50% to the operations, and by the way, it's doubling the hangar capacity today at Hanscom, it could cancel out another 20% of all Massachusetts solar. And one of the things we need to understand is, if we're going to do this, it ought to provide a public purpose, but there's no legitimate public purpose that can be ascribed to these jets, as we'll discuss a little later. And in addition, we shouldn't be subsidizing this activity. And there's a huge list of subsidies, both in operating the airport and in terms of tax subsidies that we provide. including, of every type. And the other thing to remember is, again, we can't just say, oh, let's do this, and then a technology is going to come and make all these gases go away in a couple of years. There's no known technology that replaces the greenhouse gas problem from private jets. Electric aircraft are talked about, but are not going to replace jets. They'll primarily be used for short hop, 1 or 2 people taxi services, new types of aircraft activity, and even according to the U.S. National Aviation Plan, will not replace jets. And sustainable fuels that you may have heard about, based on crops, they're not available, only reduce greenhouse gases a little bit, and would consume a significant fraction of all the arable land on Earth. So to put it, here's an interesting graph. This is a graph of emissions versus time projected into the future. And our 4 towns are down at the bottom, and we have emissions, and we have plans to reduce them to 0 by 2050. And you can see those going down. Meanwhile, you see the Hanscom emissions are greater than any of these towns, and just the private jet emissions at Hanscom, and they're growing, according to the industry, at about 5% a year. And you see that curve go shooting up there, completely the opposite of where our towns are going. And by the way, that if the hangars are built, this is just projected based on what is already there. But if the hangars are built, this red line of Hanscom emissions is going to almost immediately jump and take a leapfrog up to about 1,000 tons, 1,000 tons per year, or a megaton per year by 2025. But the most amazing thing about this graph is, look at the Boston emissions plan. Boston today has emissions way off the top of this chart, but they also have a plan to come down. And around a little after 2040, at the way things are going, if they hit their plan, Hanscom jet emissions will surpass the entire emissions of the city of Boston. So what's next? The developer has to revise and submit a new report that more accurately represents the environmental impacts. And assuming they do so and more accurately and truthfully acknowledge their impacts, the state might accept the report. And then we have to politically decide whether the state should accept this impact. We have to ask these questions and force our legislature and our governor to ask these questions. Is there a legitimate public benefit to private luxury jets? Yeah, we have med flights. There's one private jet, med flight jet at Hanscom. Should these growing emissions be exempted from Massachusetts climate plans? We have a lot of climate plans that have been adopted, and none of them comprehend the emissions of Hanscom Field. And should they be exempted even from the climate law that was mentioned earlier that requires every category of greenhouse gas emissions to decline? Unfortunately, because Massport does not report to the legislature, it's a quasi-governmental agency. It's not subject to the actions of the legislature other than a complete redo of their entire charter, which is highly unlikely. And local authorities, we have essentially no control over anything that Massport does within the envelope of Hanscom Field. And the state, as I said, is preempted from regulating emissions of aircraft, even though we can regulate other kinds, leaf blowers or any kinds of other things we can regulate, but not airplanes. And the only way to stop the project and curtail emissions growth is for the governor to use her authority over Massport, because she appoints both the director and the board of Massport to stop expansion. So we have to ask her, is she serious about all that she said about climate? And she said a lot of good things, but we need to know if she's serious. And that's really that we're going to hold her feet to the fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. It's been it looks like this, the summary makes it look like it's simple, but this has required an enormous amount of hard work and research on many people's parts. And Neil has been the master of leading all that. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is Chuck Collins. Chuck is the director of the program on inequality and the common good at the Institute for Policy Studies. Hi, Chuck. There you are. where he co-edits inequality.org. He is the author of 9 books on wealth inequality, including The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Spend Millions to Hide Trillions. I have a copy of that book right here, and I've really enjoyed reading it. He is co-author of a major report entitled Hanscom High Flyers, Private Jet Excess Doesn't Justify Airport Expansion. I've just finished his book, as I've said, and I know more about the hoarding community, not just in airplanes in wealth world, but all of those big, tall buildings in cities and towns, and why they are empty and how that kind of washes wealth. I'm waiting next, Chuck, for you to teach us about cryptocurrency. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you, Corinne and Neil, for really kind of bringing us right up to the moment in terms of where we're at. I did want to just mention that I think, building on what Diane said, that part of the demand for private jets is that the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few has grown. 1983, there were 13 billionaires. Now there's 800 billionaires. There's 1,000 centibillionaires. These people all want to fly private. So there's this crisis of unhoused private jets. Where are they going to park them all? Where are they going to go? And part of our message is we should not, in this moment, be building new infrastructure for private jet expansion. There's not a defensible, common sense way to do that in the face of a climate crisis. And I want to speak to one of the things that's come up quite a bit in the developers' proposal to their DEIR proposal. They talk about the future and possibilities of sustainable aviation fuels. And we did a report because we're kind of interested in the aviation industry is talking a lot about sustainable aviation fuels. It's sort of their answer to the question of emissions. It's really central to their vision of growth, that they're going to be able to expand aviation, we're going to expand private jets, but we're going to use a different fuel source. So we dug into that. We tried to take an independent look at the industry and its claims and did this report. And I would say that one summary point is sustainable aviation fuels really is an umbrella term. It means about as much as natural food, that we should actually take a closer look at the ingredients, what type of fuel. So part of what I want us to all do is to ask some key questions and be conversant. Next slide, please. So one of the realities is that I've come to is, there is a possibility that it's scientifically possible to create an alternative fuel source. Neil mentioned there already is electrification of very small scale aircraft for short hops, and that electric source can be from a sustainable direct source. But that's one alternative fuel, and it is not scalable in any way to address the demands, the current demands, let alone the future demands that people project for aviation. So my conclusion is sustainable aviation fuels are at this stage really more of a marketing spin. It's sort of a greenwash, not a real solution. That it's not scalable to meet the current needs. Even the aviation industry, which has been talking about sustainable aviation fuels for 15, 20 years now, consistently misses their benchmarks. This slide just sort of shows what the industry themselves has set as a target for how much of their aviation market is going to use sustainable aviation fuels versus their actual reality. And if you think about, right, this in the last year, the U.S. produced about 18,000, I'm sorry, the U.S. produced 15 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. But to meet the 2030 projection goal would require an 18,800% increase in production. So we're so far from that. And next slide. And I think that one of the key questions is, what are the trade-offs? When people talk about sustainable aviation fuel as if we're having an abstract discussion about alternatives. But the reality is there are trade-offs. The problem is that the wealthy and powerful private jet lobby have the power. They already have gotten the FAA to include money to research and pilot sustainable aviation fuel sources. Could be very different types of fuels from crops, fuels from waste, other forms of waste. But but we don't really talk about, is this really the best use of natural resources, other natural resources, even if they're renewable? Should we be fueling planes versus other social priorities? So for instance, in the UK, they figure just to kind of maintain the current level of aviation flights, they would need 50% of agricultural lands to produce alternative aviation fuels. The World Resource Institute, to produce 35 billion gallons of SAF, which is sort of the projections say 10 years out, would require 114 million acres of corn. That's 20% more than the current land used for all corn in the US. And then the question is, who's going to pay for this? So again, we will point out that sustainable aviation fuels are nowhere near on the scale that they should be in. And the aviation and the private jet lobby's answer is, well, we need more of your treasure. We need more of your tax dollars. We need more subsidies to fall in our cup to make this possible. So let me just next slide real quick to say, I think the way forward is we actually are going to have to reduce the amount of aviation activity. We're going to have to, especially private jets. As Neil said, there is no wider, broader public purpose served by expanding the private jet fleet. We're going to have to fly less, and particularly ground private jets, and reduce our consumption. We need to have truly independent research that isn't controlled by the aviation industry on these sources. And we have to ask some very tough questions. And let me just say, if we're looking at any of these fuel source discussions, alternative fuels, what is the fuel? Is it a biofuel? Is it coming from biomass? What is the lifetime cycle, emission cycle impact of that fuel source? If we're cutting down forests and we're clearing land for crops to grow aviation fuel, aren't we also losing some of our carbon sink capacity? Scale, what's the timetable? What would it actually take to bring these fuels to some level of possibility? And the reality is it's very far off and would require huge amounts of subsidies. So who's going to pay? What are the costs to consumers? Are the private jet lobby going to lobby to have the rest of us subsidize high flying private aviation? And finally, what are the competing carbonization needs? Is this the most efficient use of the limited carbon emissions budget that we have? Shouldn't we be prioritizing other decarbonization needs, buildings, public transit? To me, private jets are last in the long line. So let me just sum up by saying next slide, there is currently no realistic or scalable alternative to kerosene-based fuels that would meet current aviation needs, let alone projections of future growth. And at present, these SAF technologies are not moving at the speed of climate change and will fail to meet any kind of future goals. And in fact, scaling up some of these alternative fuels would actually thwart climate emission reduction goals. Back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Chuck. And of course, we hear the optimism that Susan presented to us in the beginning, which says these things are solvable. One of the solutions is not, it would appear, this agricultural source of fuel. So that we have to find another way to do it. And let's hope that there's the ingenuity in our world to manage it. Chuck, thank you so much. You've made It's so clear for all of us. Our final speaker tonight is Alex Chatfield. He provides an inspiration that keeps, hi, Alex, that keeps all of us uplifted. Oh, uplifted. That's probably not the best word, is it? He keeps us grounded. Maybe that's the better word. In any case, Alex is fantastic. He's a clinical social worker. He has lived in Lincoln for 27 years and is a member of the Lincoln Democratic Town Committee. As the select board appointee, he is a representative to the Massport Community Advisory Council, known as MCAS, which I hear about often when you attend these kinds of seminars or get involved. A participant in innumerable climate-related campaigns, he joined SPJE at its inception in May of 2023. Specifically, Alex coordinates the direct action of our work and trains activists in thoughtful, peaceful civil disobedience. In other words, he teaches us how to make good trouble. Thank you, Alex.
Alex, you're muted.
I'll learn about the mute button eventually. The hour is late. I'm going to go very quickly through these slides. I want to thank everybody who's here. I recognize so many names who are on our participant list tonight. Many of you have already shown up and have contributed in so many ways. And so my pitch at the end of the evening tonight is let's keep it up. This has been a remarkably successful enterprise so far. It's going to continue to grow, and I think we're going to win. So you've already heard about many of our goals, and they are continuing. There are a lot of specifics, and there are a lot of general campaigns. We are going to continue to focus on Massport. We are going to continue to focus on the environmental review. We're going to keep the pressure up on Governor Healy, and we're going to continue to grow this campaign in many ways. Next slide. I'm going to give you a few quick specifics just to inspire you. This is to let you know that we're really big on collective action and on focusing on different constituencies that can help with this effort. So we're going to just choose 3, and this comes with an open invitation that you can join any of them. Next slide. One of our most successful efforts has been organizing at the municipal level. We have raised awareness in many communities about this problem through efforts like tonight. We have gone to select board meetings. We have offered examples of resolutions that they can pass in order to urge Governor Healy to stop this project. Over a dozen have passed them so far, and more are on the way. And this is something that you can do in your town, and we can help you. So if you're interested, get in touch with us. You can write to muni@stopprivatejetexpansion.org or just go to our website and look for more information. Next. We have recently inaugurated a youth campaign. We're doing that because we want to empower youth to make real and lasting contributions to the climate movement. Youth voices are extremely important and impactful, and we've seen wonderful examples of that. Girl who's in the middle picture was actually one of our State House speakers. She presented a copy of our petition to the staff in Governor Healy's office. She's a dynamo, and we want to cultivate the help and the skills of many other youth leaders. Next. We also have a faith-based campaign. There are a number of churches and denominations that have joined our coalition. Now we are looking to amplify their voices. We want them to compose and send resolutions to the governor. We feel that churches can be wonderful organizing spaces in the climate movement in general. And when they speak with that moral authority, that comes from their spiritual and faith practices, people listen. So we are thankful to have Episcopal churches and UU churches and other faith communities as part of our coalition. And we are going to step it up and amplify their voices, reaching directly to Governor Healy. Next. So you've heard about many of our actions. You've showed up for those actions. You've been to our rallies. You've been to our standouts. You helped us to invade Hanscom Field on April 20th, and along with our friends in XR Boston, that airport was shut down for several hours while people committing strictly peaceful, non-destructive, non-violent civil disobedience managed to interfere with the loading and unloading of the jets. I'm going to put a plug in for those folks and invite people here to Concord, Mass on October 9th. Show up as early as you can. Court starts at 9 a.m. We'd like to have a big presence outside and inside the courtroom. But these are other examples. And the reason we would be going, by the way, is to support the people who took part in that April 20th protest. So check this list. There's tons of information on our website about other ways that you can get involved with these actions. And it is a strength in numbers game. So please, if you haven't been doing those things, come join us. Next. As Neil said, we have to act now, because if we do not end this madness and get this project canceled, once it's built, it's going to go into service for the next 30 years. And there will be absolutely no way to restrict its use or to keep the private jets from using it. And you've seen what that looks like in terms of the emissions. Next. So if you haven't done these things, I'm going to go down a real quick checklist. Sign and share the petition to Governor Healy. You can find the link at our website. That is also how we stay in touch with you and your friends. So if you know somebody who hasn't signed it, please let us know. If you want a lawn sign, I have a big box of them in my backyard, and we would be happy to share. So again, visit the website, sign the petition, and get in touch with us. If you're part of a climate organization or any civic group, join our coalition. We can give you details on how to do that. Take part in one of our campaigns or actions. Organize an event like this. We'll go anywhere, talk to anybody. We can help you with slides. We can show up and help you do it. And looking ahead, maybe it's 6 months from now, maybe longer, there will, we think, be a supplemental environmental impact report submitted. We generated a ton of comments, which helped get the last one rejected. We'll do it again, and you can be a part of that. Next. So I'm going to say thanks and turn it back over to Diane. We appreciate your time. We appreciate all you've done to help us. And we're going to get this done. Back to Diane.
Thank you for that optimism and for that encouragement, Alex. You're an inspiration to all of us on a regular basis. We have very few minutes left for any kinds of questions, but I am going to take one from the chat box. And I'm going to take two actually from the chat box. And the first one is for Susan, if she's still here. Susan, you are here. Is the Wisconsin law still in effect, Susan?
That's a great question. I was trying to find the answer while we were talking.
Okay.
No, but I didn't. I'm pretty sure it is. It's a little more narrow, but I think it does still exist.
Thank you so much. And could you remind, for people who may not remember what that means, the Wisconsin law that exists is, or
what it allowed in the 60s was for Wisconsin citizens, there has to be a kind of a minimum number that's part of the petition, to ask for a hearing to adjudicate whether or not an action by a government agency is legal, is appropriate. And what they sued for was to stop the use of DDT because they argued it was a water pollutant based on dead fish.
Well, they were right. So
They were.
thank you so much. And we have one last comment that I think is really important from Dan Evans. And he says, when another angle or reason to oppose, and Susan, I'm going to let you hear this one in particular, to oppose expanded jet traffic is that jet engines, which are gas turbines, are a chemically dirty source of power. He said, I worked in the power generation industry a while back, and at that time, such engines were overall tied with burning hard coal as the dirtiest form of power generation. Is anyone in a position to check this out today?
I don't know if other people on here know more about this than I. I mean, aviation certainly makes a significant contribution to air pollution, but I don't believe that that it overwhelms vehicular traffic right now. So
Okay, that's a helpful and quick response. Have we identified the last thing? My granddaughter tells me that Taylor Swift actually, when she flies a private jet, feels guilty about it. And so she thinks offset that flight and that flight effort by doing other things, by contributing money to various organizations, by doing things. And so a very good question, which I don't think any of us can answer, but it's a potent and important question, is, have we identified any private jet owners or family members? This is from John, I hope I say your name properly, John Cortez. Have we identified any private jet owner or family members who are similarly opposed to the expansion of jet flight? I hope we have, and it would be a wonderful thing to use. What a remarkable panel we have enjoyed hearing from this evening. As we leave each other, I am going to intone a slogan, one I suspect you will recognize. It's quite simple. We're not going back. We're not going back to a world that ignored commercial pollution at our peril. When we see something that is not right, we say something. For democracy is not a state, it is an act. And every generation must engage in keeping our world healthy and peaceful. For guess what? When we act, we win. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. It's been a wonderfully informative process. There will be a videotape for you to share with your friends. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.